Welcome to Reading Together from Sea Harp Press, and let's call this the casual edition. I'm Eugene Luning, co-founder of Sea Harp, and I'm so delighted that you can join me here in my study as we dive into one of my all-time favorite Christian works, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. This is a HarperCollins hardcover edition of the book. I want to remind you always it's not officially part of the Sea Harp catalog. And in today's episode, we're going to be going into Chapter 2 of Book 3 of this work. The title of this chapter is The Cardinal Virtues. The previous section was originally composed to be given as a short talk on the air. If you are allowed to talk for only 10 minutes, pretty well everything else has to be sacrificed to brevity. One of my chief reasons for dividing morality up into 3 parts, with my picture of the ships sailing in convoy, was that this seemed the shortest way of covering the ground. Here, I want to give some idea of another way in which the subject has been divided by old writers, which was too long to use in my talk, but which is a very good one. According to this longer scheme, there are 7 virtues. 4 of them are called cardinal virtues, and the remaining 3 are called theological virtues. The cardinal ones are those which all civilized people recognize. The theological are those which, as a rule, only Christians know about. I shall deal with the theological ones later on. At present, I am talking about the 4 cardinal virtues. The word cardinal has nothing to do with cardinals in the Roman Church. It comes from a Latin word meaning the hinge of a door. These were called cardinal virtues because they are, as we should say, pivotal. They are prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude. I'm going to keep reading because it's all of a piece as we keep going. Prudence means practical common sense, taking the trouble to think out what you are doing and what is likely to come of it. Nowadays, most people hardly think of prudence as one of the virtues. In fact, because Christ said we could only get into his world by being like children, many Christians have the idea that, provided you are good, it does not matter being a fool. But that is a misunderstanding. In the first place, most children show plenty of prudence about doing the things they are really interested in and think them out quite sensibly. In the second place, as St. Paul points out, Christ never meant that we were to remain children in intelligence. On the contrary, he told us to be not only as harmless as doves, but also as wise as serpents. He wants a child's heart, but a grown-up's head. He wants us to be simple, single-minded, affectionate, and teachable as good children are, but he also wants every bit of intelligence we have to be alert at its job and in first-class fighting trim. The fact that you are giving money to a charity does not mean that you need not try to find out whether that charity is a fraud or not. The fact that what you are thinking about is God himself, for example, when you are praying, does not mean that you can be content with the same babyish ideas which you had when you were a 5-year-old. It is, of course, quite true that God will not love you any the less or have less use for you if you happen to have been born with a very second-rate brain. He has room for people with very little sense, but he wants everyone to use what sense they have. The proper motto is not, "Be good, sweet maid, and let who can be clever," but, "Be good, sweet maid, and don't forget that this involves being as clever as you can." God is no fonder of intellectual slackers than of any other slackers. If you are thinking of becoming a Christian, I warn you, you are embarking on something which is going to take the whole of you, brains and all. But fortunately, it works the other way around. Anyone who is honestly trying to be a Christian will soon find his intelligence being sharpened. One of the reasons why it needs no special education to be a Christian is that Christianity is an education itself. That is why an uneducated believer like Bunyan was able to write a book that has astonished the whole world. Now I'm finally going to pause. Obviously, he was referencing there John Bunyan, whose Pilgrim's Progress is one of the most reproduced works ever written, not just in the Christian church. But I actually want to flip the page back and go back to this idea of being, harmless as doves, wise as serpents, this idea of being children at heart, but being grown-ups in our head. I have a dear friend, Greg, who years ago we were sitting and having breakfast together, and we were talking about this very concept. What does it mean that we would be childlike, and yet it's very clear that he wants to develop us? I love this idea here that Christians have a Christianity is an education itself. So what does it mean to stay childlike of heart, but to grow up in intellect, in belief, in wonder, in all these aspects that really do require our full intelligence? And my friend Greg, this was probably the wisest thing I've ever heard him say. It was just wonderful, kind of took my breath away. He sat at the breakfast table and said, it reminds me of, days of old, and of, let's imagine, a wise king, and he has two sons. One of the sons is very little, and he's prized, he's loved, he's just this gentle little child. The other one is older, kind of rough and tough and ready for whatever. And so my friend Greg said, the difference is that both are, of course, sons. They are children of God. They have a childlike nature with reference to that father. But in the day that the enemy attacks, the little child is put away in a cupboard. The older child, the son, is told to go put on his armor. That's the difference. So I don't know where you think you are in terms of sort of your progress in, let's call it, intellectual understanding of those spiritual things that are all around us in Christendom. I don't know if you think you're far down the road or if you feel like you're just a baby to all this. Well, like Lewis is saying to us, let us grow in prudence. Let us grow also in our intellectual understanding and in our pushing to understand even difficult things that are within the scriptures. In the Phillips translation of the book of Hebrews, he encourages us to move past the ABCs of our Christian understanding to the higher, to the heavenly things. I like to think that on the day of battle, on the day when our king needs his sons to come and fight, that we would have grown up, that we won't need to be hidden away in a cupboard, but we will be told, go put on your armor. Today is the day. Is that your intention? Well, today is the day where you can grow. Isn't that exciting? I'll keep reading. Temperance is, unfortunately, one of these words that has changed its meaning. It now usually means teetotalism. And in case you're not familiar with that word, to be teetotaler or teetotalist means you just abstain from drinking alcohol entirely. But in the days when the second cardinal virtue was christened temperance, it meant nothing of the sort. Temperance referred not specially to drink, but to all pleasures, and it meant not abstaining, but going the right length and no further. It is a mistake to think that Christians ought all to be teetotalers. Mohammedanism, not Christianity, is the teetotal religion. Of course, it may be the duty of a particular Christian, or of any Christian at a particular time, to abstain from strong drink, either because he is the sort of man who cannot drink at all without drinking too much, or because he is with people who are inclined to drunkenness and must not encourage them by drinking himself. But the whole point is that he is abstaining for a good reason from something which he does not condemn and which he likes to see other people enjoying. One of the marks of a certain type of bad man is that he cannot give up a thing himself without wanting everyone else to give it up. That is not the Christian way. An individual Christian may see fit to give up all sorts of things for special reasons, marriage, or meat, or beer, or the cinema, but the moment he starts saying the things are bad in themselves, or looking down his nose at other people who do not use or do use them, he has taken the wrong turning. One great piece of mischief has been done by the modern restriction of the word temperance to the question of drink. It helps people to forget that you can be just as intemperate about lots of other things. A man who makes his golf or his motor bicycle the center of his life, or a woman who devotes all her thoughts to clothes or bridge or her dog, is being just as intemperate as someone who gets drunk every evening. Of course, it does not show on the outside so easily. Bridge mania or golf mania do not make you fall down in the middle of the road. But God is not deceived by externals. And I don't know about you, but I'll speak for myself, have always loved that Lewis had a truly Pauline understanding of the do's and don'ts of what it means to follow Jesus. In the same way that Paul said, listen, no day is holier than another. Eat the meat that's been offered to idols or don't. I don't really care. Well, Lewis is saying to us, if you're going to go have a pint at the pub on a Friday night, I shall not judge you. But he points to this fact that Paul also speaks to making account of the weaker brother. If you're with someone who is struggling with drink, well, in that context, to follow Jesus, you pay attention to that friend and you choose the way of temperance. But I also love that Lewis then sort of twists the knife in a little bit. He says, hey, it's one thing to be temperate in one way, and yet to really give yourself over to something else that takes you away from the way of Jesus. So I wonder what it is for you. I have my own sort of proclivities, things that I like to disappear into, and occasionally I'll realize, boy, I think I'm giving myself over to that a little too much. And here's the test for you. What do you think about? Given the chance to take a walk, are you tending to think about that hobby of yours or your pet anxiety that you just kind of give yourself over to and think that you're doing something? Anything, whether good or bad, that takes us away from the affections of Jesus or of giving ourselves further over to Jesus is something we need to think about with regard to temperance. Friends, this is not religiosity in the name of following Jesus. This is paying attention to the fact that we humans can get into all kinds of imbalances that are unhelpful to our spiritual life. So being a student of yourself and of those things that grab your thoughts in your heart, well, that's an important part of learning to follow Jesus in the everyday. Let me keep reading. Justice means much more than the sort of thing that goes on in law courts. It is the old name for everything we should now call fairness. It includes honesty, give and take, truthfulness, keeping promises, and all that side of life. And fortitude includes both kinds of courage, the kind that faces danger as well as the kind that sticks it under pain. Guts is perhaps the nearest modern English. You will notice, of course, that you cannot practice any of the other virtues very long without bringing this one into play. There is one further point about the virtues that ought to be noticed. There is a difference between doing some particular just or temperate action and being a just or temperate man. Someone who is not a good tennis player may now and then make a good shot. What you mean by a good player is a man whose eye and muscles and nerves have been so trained by making innumerable good shots that they can now be relied on. They have a certain tone or quality which is there even when he is not playing, just as a mathematician's mind has a certain habit and outlook which is there even when he is not doing mathematics. In the same way, a man who perseveres in doing just actions gets in the end a certain quality of character. Now it is that quality rather than the particular actions which we mean when we talk of virtue. I was reminded as I was reading that paragraph, probably that's why I was stumbling over a few words. I was thinking when I was about 17 years old, I had the wonderful pleasure of traveling in Israel with my dear mother, who's now departed, but we had a great trip to Israel. We got to go on an archaeological dig. And I was so fascinated being on this tell, as they call kind of this site, where literally a city would be built upon another. So what was fascinating on this archaeological dig, we were on the north side of the Sea of Galilee, was that we had sections of the dig that were literally in first century village area. So those were higher. And so we would find, Roman coins, we'd find bits of pottery that could be dated to that first century. So, of course, that was thrilling to think, man, Jesus could have been around that pottery, that coin. But then further down the site, it was actually all the way back into like the Solomonic or even Davidic period. So this city had been built up over time through essentially accretions, sort of building upon each other to where up here was the first century and down here was all those years before. That's how I tend to think about the building of virtue in our lives. It's accretive. So yes, to this idea, every once in a while I'll be on a tennis court and I'll make one good shot, but I'm not a particularly good tennis player because I don't give it practice. And I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it and doing it. I don't watch tennis for the sake of learning technique. I just only care so much. However, there are other things that I am passionate about, that I practice 2-3 times a week. My middle son and I, we rock climb. And so once, twice, 3 times a week, we go indoor climbing just to work on getting our repetitions on certain movements. And we learn different boulder problems so that we feel like we're more confident when we're outdoor climbing. So a couple years ago, I was nowhere near where I am today because skills have been building upon each other. Friends, rock climbing is nothing. Tennis is nothing. So much of life is nothing. But when you and I will give ourselves today to the obediences required by the way of Jesus, then those become patterns within us. They're not just trick shots on the tennis court that we make once every 10 years. It's something that we do every single day. So the way I turn my cheek when someone slaps the other cheek today, well, now that's part of my testimony. It's part of my character, my virtue. So tomorrow, not only does that become perhaps a little bit easier to do, but it's also becoming who I am. Like Jesus, I am known to turn the other cheek when slapped on this one. So I want to put that before you, the way that in the old kind of Israelite ways, they would build up and it would create this sort of sediment of history. Well, that's what you and I are doing. We're building out our testimony by day obediences that are becoming our character in Jesus. It's actually kind of exciting when you think about it that way. I promise you, according to the laws of sanctification, you will be a different person over time as you, with your will, follow him today and tomorrow and the next day. All right, I'm going to read from here to the end of the chapter because it's all of one piece. Let's finish out. This distinction regarding the virtues is important for the following reason. If we thought only of the particular actions we might encourage, three wrong ideas. 1, we might think that, provided you did the right thing, it did not matter how or why you did it. Whether you did it willingly or unwillingly, sulkily or cheerfully, through fear of public opinion or for its own sake. But the truth is that right actions done for the wrong reason do not help to build the internal quality or character called a virtue. And it is this quality or character that really matters. If the bad tennis player hits very hard, not because he sees that a very hard stroke is required, but because he has lost his temper, his stroke might possibly, by luck, help him to win that particular game, but it will not be helping him to become a reliable player. That's his first point. 2, we might think that God wanted simply obedience to a set of rules, whereas he really wants people of a particular sort. 3, we might think that the virtues were necessary only for this present life, that in the other world we could stop being just because there is nothing to quarrel about, and stop being brave because there is no danger. Now, it is quite true that there will probably be no occasion for just or courageous acts in the next world, but there will be every occasion for being the sort of people that we can become only as the result of doing such acts here. The point is not that God will refuse you admission to his eternal world if you have not got certain qualities of character. The point is that if people have not got at least the beginnings of those qualities inside them, then no possible external conditions could make a heaven for them. That is, could make them happy with the deep, strong, unshakable kind of happiness God intends for us. Those are his 3 arguments against believing that we can just sort of one-off virtue as we go through life. But I want to go back to point 2 there to close out this chapter. I love this line. We might think that God wanted simply obedience to a set of rules, whereas he really wants people of a particular sort. Do you know what sort of people he wants? He wants disciples. He wants people into whose lives he can walk and say, follow me. And that in a repentant sort of way, they will turn from what they are doing and actually substantively follow him that day and the next and the next. And as they come to know him and as they begin to actually internalize the realities of the cross, the resurrection, the ascension, the power of the Holy Spirit, friends, they become his. They become people who bear his stamp. I like that wording there. People of a particular sort. So my friends, are we people of a particular sort? Are we those who have counted the cost, who have risen to this day, and who will follow him with everything we've got until we rest tonight? Will we, when we make a mistake, turn it back to him, repent quickly, and receive via intimacy with him complete forgiveness? And then will we go out into our workplace, the school where we're studying, into the grocery store, into the coffee shop, actually carrying with us the stamp of being a particular sort of person in Jesus? That's my prayer for you and for me. That this would not be something we do on Sundays and then forget about the rest of the week. That it would, in fact, in that sort of sedimentary way I talked about, be built up in the layers of the days we're living. What an adventure we're on, my friends, to follow a living Savior who is both God and man and is calling us into all the things of his heavenly kingdom. I can't imagine anything that should grab us like this does. We have been in C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. I've been reading to you from Book 3, Chapter 2. I look forward to our next episode, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.